I first came to the Pont with my family during lockdown. It was a beautiful sort of first day of spring kind of occasion. And it was just an amazing sort of welcome from the staff there. And I just felt very much at home. I mean, again, I'm at the age where I want to work in environments where I feel that I could do the best and work with the best. And DuPont was one of those situations where it was a hand in glove moment. I just remembered the first Spectrum computers. And therefore I thought, okay, let's present it in a way which is very simple. On these monitors, anyone would recognize that this sort of low grade sort of Spectrum, sort of ping pong elements on the screen, be able to sort of relate to it. It's about the fact that it's bigger than the screen. When you see a Monet, it doesn't matter how large the canvas is, it's always bigger than the canvas. It's always about what's outside the frame rather than inside the frame. What's inside the frame is a trigger, is a starting point. You know, what was exciting for me about Atlas, working on that piece a long time in the making, was to put, you know, to plant into an environment a sense of perspective. I mean, again, from day one, as me as an artist, I was dealing with perspective from, you know, an A4 piece of paper, working with a crayon, to film, you know, to working on feature films. I'm going outside the frame further and further. And with Atlas, what it does, it sort of puts us, I would hope at least, puts us in the center of contemplation. It allows a certain sense of slowing down. It allows a certain sense of reflection, just because it sort of puts you at the center of a certain sense of distance and universe and eternity as such. Because again, when you see the monitors, there's 4 monitors in Atlas, which sort of goes north, south, east, and west. And what they do, they're traveling at 500 times the speed of light. For us to get from one place to another, you know, in our lifetime, we wouldn't make it. You know, you can live and die before you even get a millimeter from what you see on the screens. But of course, we're moving. We rendered these machines to move at 500 times the speed of light, so you get a certain sense of travel within our universe. All the stuff that we're dealing with now in our everyday, it reduces it down to who we are and what we're doing right now. It sort of takes away all of the sort of confetti of our everyday and places us at the center. I was working with a gentleman called David Kramers, who is this extraordinary gentleman who I met in UCLA in the University of California, who has been working with NASA, and he put us in collaboration with himself involved with the European Space Agency. And this was to gather information on our universe. There's a telescope which we use for their data in the European Space Agency, which gave us a lot of the data that we have in Atlas. But what they never did, of course, it was never visualized as we do here. So that was intriguing for the scientists as well, to sort of see these things visualized. My involvement is to visualize the information, but also to manipulate it, that there is a sense of time for us, a visual time for the viewer. So we spread it up to 500 times the speed of light. So that's why you have that visual sort of a progression in the piece. And again, what's interesting about the piece is that, you know, it's never repeated. There's no end to it, because the images get updated all the time. So there's a never end. Every time you see it, it will be brand new. You can live and die, and you'll never see the end of this. So this whole idea of a continuation of time long before we're gone is for me is very profound. Where is the edge? Where is the frame? What I think interests me for what an artwork could do is an artwork is a starting point. I don't want people to get bamboozled with the sort of, you know, all this sort of technological information or the sort of kind of distances or whatever, but it's just about you, us, who we are. So it allows you, in fact, it gives you a framework to contemplate, to think, to journey into where we are now. And again, I've lived with artworks. I'm 56 years old. For example, there's a great Van Eyck painting in the National Portrait Gallery, the man with the red turban. And I've been living with that painting since I was 19 years old. So for like 37 years, I've been going back and forth to that painting, and I'm very obviously I'm a different person to when I was 19 years old, but I'm on that journey, meaning that it's always given me something to. It's always different every time I see it. The fact you can have this relationship with an artwork and grow with it, and I think Atlas hopefully provides us in space for that. And there's always grand gestures as far as when people talk about space or technology or AI or whatever they're working with. It's always something like out of the 1970s. It's almost like everything is referring to sort of Kubrick and a Kubrick-esque sort of space station. If you actually go and see these things at NASA, or you see these actual spacecrafts, they're like tin cans. They're like, how the hell did that get into space? You know, they're not these sexy design sort of vehicles or vessels. The whole idea of the sort of time and the depth and space, I think it's always been with me, really. I think it's always sort of had an impact on me because, as I said before, frame, because frame is comfort. There's a certain kind of limitation. There's a certain sense of enclosement. But when there is no frame, it's free fall. There's a certain sense of vulnerability. There's a certain sense of, you want someone to catch you, but when there's nothing to catch you, hold on to as such. What do you grab onto? What is your foundation? And that's something I was just searching for. Is there an answer? I don't know. There's no time and there's no frame in Atlas. It's just an existence. And that's wonderful. That's exciting to work with. I don't want to be comfortable. I never want to be comfortable. I want to be uncomfortable. If I'm comfortable, then it's not a good space. You want to be afraid. You want to be frightened. You want to be fearful. I want to destabilize myself in order to sort of get stable. Find the pivot point. That's what I want to do because everything is universal. Everything. There's nothing personal. Think of your most embarrassing thing that ever happened to you. It's happened to a lot of people. It sounds really weird to say this. I'm a straight man, but I was interested in dark rooms a lot. There's a magazine called Butt magazine, and there was an essay about dark rooms in there because I was interested in sort of the narrative, the geography of dark rooms. There's a situation of sound and narrative, of course. As I said to you before, how sound can conjure narrative, and that's what I wanted to do with Untitled. There's, of course, it is me hitting a bag, a boxing bag, a large boxing bag. But within that, there's, the narrative is of now. And there's me within this sort of confined sort of space. The sounds, it's like the people are dropping bombs in it. In fact, it is a landscape. It's a landscape painting. Rather than a portrait, because the portrait is personal, it's more landscape. Untitled is more landscape than portrait, 100%. So it's interesting when I talk about, because we talked about the same things in what we're talking about now as far as spaces are concerned, and uncomfortable spaces, and I want to be in uncomfortable spaces also in order to make it comfortable. I want to put myself in situations which aren't necessarily known. So it's all about the recognizable but unfamiliar for me. So it's just exciting in the conversations and debates which are happening right now within art, caused by what would happen with Black Lives Matter, caused by what happened with Me Too, and caused by the gay movement, which is going on now. This is an amazing conversation, debate which relates to our actuality, all of our actualities, which is fantastic, So with the personal work, for example, Sunshine say about my father. It's very confrontational in a way for me. Again, I've never done anything like that before as a work of a personal narrative. But it made sense because in a way it is about that closeness and also that distance. And that puts everything in perspective because what we're dealing with in Sunshine State, we're dealing with race, we're dealing with place, and we're dealing with time. As I said in the piece, the sort of vulnerabilities in some ways of a Black man at that time in Florida, and the fact that my father escaped death, I wouldn't be speaking to you now. So there's this kind of fragility, which sort of is really brought home in a way. The starting point was a story that my father told me just before he died. And the story is about him being a migrant worker from leaving Grenada, which is a Caribbean island, and going to the Florida in late 50s to as a migrant worker to pick oranges. And in some ways, there's a parallel to how things are now in the United States as far as migrants and migrant workers. There was an incident that happened where he was nearly murdered. I mean, this must be my father in his sort of early 20s, and he never told me this story until towards the end of his life. So when he told me the story, I thought, my goodness gracious, my father had been living with this story for most of his life. The fact that he mightn't have been here through just chance, and how other people that he knew were no longer here. But again, there's something universal about it, of course, as well. And another element to Sunshine State, of course, is the jazz singer. The first talkie, I think 1927, Al Johnson movie, which has the line in it that you ain't heard nothing yet when you start to sing. It's the first sort of syncopated sound film. So they illustrate, in some ways, illustrate the film with sound. It illustrates. And I always wanted to work with that footage. I couldn't get the rights for a long time until sort of I won an Oscar and I could talk to people it's a true story. And I could talk to people at Warner Brothers to get the rights. It's not who you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know. But then at the same time, the copyright longevity ran out because obviously over 100 years. So I decided to sort of put the two together, this narrative of my father and the jazz singer, as well as another element, which was to do with the whole idea of light and the sun. It was about the whole idea of the state of the world which would allow those things to happen, the whole idea of the sort of, again, Negro and popular culture, because, the minstrel, which Al Johnson sort of portrays in The Jazz Singer, is the most popular art form of its time, is a sort of foundation of popular culture, is Bugs Bunny, is Michael Jackson, it's kind of interesting, all these things, is Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse is a minstrel because, the gloves, and it goes all the way up to sort of Michael Jackson with his glove. It's very interesting in history. But what allowed that to happen was the whole idea of how people saw Black people. And I wanted to put those two illustrations together because, of course, my father nearly dying nearly being murdered, in Florida, and that movie had a foundational element to what happened to him. So to put them together in some ways was interesting for me. Was essential for me. The idea of fracturing the narrative, because we have the narrative of my father, tell the story of my father, and then when it comes around, when I come to it again, there are words missing. And then when we come to it for the third time, those words which are missing are present and other words are missing. And in the last one, it becomes a certain kind of situation where there's sort of there's absence and presence. Absence and presence. Because it's like anything else. If I tell you a story, I imagine if you told someone else that story, it'd be very different to obviously how I told it. And it's about memory, oral history, but also it's about erasure and removal and replaced. So I was interested in those words. To take something out, would it still make sense? To place it back in? So interesting, what you will see in the piece is Al Johnson applying on this sort of black makeup to his face, to sort of to transform him into the sort of Negro. And the Negro was, in some ways, it was as a kind of buffoon. For me, I want to erase that because that's the foundation of so many things. You could talk about, within film history, you could talk about Birth of a Nation again. All the people in that movie who were seen as black were white people with black faces. And then you have me sitting here who made 12 Years a Slave, the first picture by a black director to win Best Picture, or black producer to win Best Picture. That narrative is all there. There's a certain circular aspect to it, and a mantra because of the story, and it breaks down and it sort of builds up. It's erased and then it's replaced, it's replenished. So there's some kind of a mantra to it. It's like whirling dermishes, when they spin to get closer to God. That's the whole idea of you put you in a trance, put you in a certain sense of a time and space to get closer to something, to sort of have an understanding of the now. It's very interesting, isn't it? How you, in order to sort of get in control, one has to be out of control. these flowers were constant in the landscape. You know, I mean, some of these flowers, of course, had been sort of brought to Grenada, but majority of these flowers were constant in the landscape since the Arawaks, who were the native people of Grenada. And then, of course, there was the Caribs who came over from South America. And then it was repopulated again with, you know, the Europeans who basically virtually killed all of the Caribs, and then brought in Africans and also again after that people from India and Asia. Again, so you could say that the Caribbean has been repopulated 4 or 5 times, but there's a constant within that, you know, violent landscape has been these flowers. These islands were captured and turned into agricultural industries for you know, the Western Europe, you know, sugarcane or cotton or whatever crops. That's what it was used for. But these sort of agricultural sort of you know, beautiful phenomena of these flowers were there for, and I imagine that at some point a Carib, an Arawak, a French person, a Dutch person, an English person, an African person would have looked at this and contemplated and saw the beauty in this. And I just love this moment of pause within the landscape, this moment of contemplation, of reflection beyond what was immediately going on. Brings another narrative into the narrative which I am sort of presenting as such. And again, you always find beauty within that. It's about how one wants to relate to a certain time in history, and actually how one wants to communicate a certain time in history. Again, I think it's like the sun in Sunshine State, or I talked about in Atlas the sort of situation of framing. Well, I wanted these flowers to frame the narrative of this story of the Caribbean and colonialism. As I've said a number of times in this conversation, existing is enough, and I feel that again that is the best. That is the best sort of reason to make work, to make art. That it exists. It exists to sort of contemplate. It exists to sort of look at. It exists to ignore. But that it exists is enough. That we live in an environment which allows us to make things which are not necessarily to do with, you know, functionality, but that they exist for our mentality. And I think that is a certain kind of the goal. That is the sort of quintessential goal of any humanity. I would hope so, that we create things that exist for our contemplation and our reflect on our existence. And that's what I think, I hope these works contribute to.